wanted to research what is the difference between instruments and speakers, what is it, and what is it that makes us experience something as authentic versus not. So this is where it started. So it was a 6-year period of research, reading, experimenting, purely as a passion. It wasn't about starting an audio company. And then we ended up with a product, and people said to me, why don't you try and sell it? And I needed some input really to know whether it's truly authentic, because as not being a musician, not making recordings and so on, not creating the art, does it sound like the product I wanted to make? I asked the musician if he would come and hear it, and it turned out that this musician is also a record producer. I didn't know then, a legend within Danish jazz and well beyond. And he came with a CD home to me, and we had to listen, and it felt like an exam, and he was sitting listening to this thing, and he said in the end, oh my God, this sounds good. That was kind of like one verification that maybe I do have something that's unique. So there's a team of collaborators who are now building these speakers or doing the marketing. Is now done by my 2 daughters. 3D graphics is done by one of my daughters. Social media and so on. So it's a family and collaboration business where we built these speakers, really nice design, fantastic craftsmanship, all to order, and just as you might discover, very unique in terms of sound. The research that I did, and also fairly recent research into instruments. How do instruments actually behave? What is their dispersion pattern? Led me to this idea that it should not have a baffle, and it should not contain the sound inside a box. It turns out that when you measure a piano or a bass player, an opera singer, the dispersion pattern is about 180 degrees. It is not in the low frequencies fully omnidirectional. And it's important that when you make an attack on an instrument like the piano keys, we recognize that as being a piano from the very complex dispersion pattern and frequency mix that there is in the attack before a string settles into the fundamental. It's that attack that I really wanted to capture. In the bass, that's extremely difficult if you go with the box conventional way of making a bass. So with a box loudspeaker, you can have up to 70 milliseconds of delay at 20 Hertz. And for those who don't know what I mean by delay, it's important that whether it's a low bass frequency or a high-pitched treble frequency, the loudspeaker has to make sure that those frequencies all arrive at the same time at your ear. I arrived at what's called a folded dipole. The properties of that is that it has a port at the front and 2 ports at the back. Trouble I found with that though is that it's still built as a box in its original shape, but I like the idea of a folded dipole because it has a radiation pattern that is out of phase at the back and in phase at the front. And that's important because to the sides of the speaker you then get a natural cancellation. You do not get resonances from the side walls. And on the long end of the room, the front wall and the back wall gets hit with out-of-phase sound and the front wall gets hit with in-phase sound. At some place in the room, when the reflections happen, they will cancel out automatically. So you actually ameliorate this idea of standing waves that you get when you just have an omnidirectional speaker with no phase difference behind and in front. So we now have a very specific system for the bass, and we have to marry it with the mid-range and the tweeter. We also wanted to achieve no diffraction at all. Diffraction meaning that sound waves hits either a baffle, the edge of a speaker, the edge of a box, and starts making new waves. Psychoacoustically, our mind will pick those up. Once your subconscious mind has picked it up, you can't unhear them. And now this pleasurable soundstage, 3D soundstage that we like, it'll collapse. So what we come up with here is a very slender shape. It happens to be a treble clef, simply because that shape actually has exactly the properties we wanted. There's smooth rounding on top of the treble clef, and the mid-range and tweeter systems are very smooth in their shape, and they are as small as physically possible in terms of drivers that have the right properties. So the speaker is active. The benefit of making it active, first of all, from the research we came from, is that technically you can control that the signal you put in acoustically is also exactly the signal that you get out fully integrated. The other thing is that it's all built in, so from a user's perspective, all you have to do is add music. You don't have to worry about what amplifier might I use, should I have these cables, etc. All of these are variables in this transfer function equation that if you play with them, which is very good fun, I've done that a lot, but I just cannot guarantee the properties and the sound of the speakers unless I go active. I also wanted it to be a design item, so somehow the whole thing came together. So we now have a loudspeaker that we collaborate with furniture companies, for example. When we put them into a room, it doesn't really look like a conventional loudspeaker. It looks more like a sculpture, more like something that could fit into an interior. So that's another benefit of going through the research and simply realizing that it leads to something other than a box.